Your skin is burning. Then it's freezing. Your throat feels raw, like swallowing glass. There's no doctor in the next room. No pharmacy down the street. No medicine cabinet stocked with anything that might help. You're sick, and right now, you're completely on your own. For most of human history, this wasn't a nightmare scenario. This was just what sickness looked like. No clinics. No antibiotics. No quick diagnosis on a glowing screen. Just your body, fighting something invisible, while the rest of the world kept moving. So how did anyone survive long enough to pass that immune system down to you? The answer isn't what most people assume. It wasn't pure luck. It wasn't simply that the weak died and the strong carried on. The real story is buried in bones, hidden in caves, and stuck in the hardened plaque scraped off ancient teeth. Start in northern Iraq, inside a place called Shanidar Cave. Researchers found the skeleton of a Neanderthal man, now known as Shanidar I. His bones tell a brutal story. One arm was withered, likely amputated below the elbow. He was blind in one eye. Most of his teeth were gone, and his hearing was almost certainly damaged too. By any modern survival logic, he shouldn't have lasted more than a few weeks alone in the wild. He lived for years. Maybe decades. Paleoanthropologist Eric Trinkaus studied these remains closely, and his conclusion reshaped how scientists think about Neanderthals. Someone had to feed this man. Someone had to help him walk, keep him warm, watch for danger he physically couldn't see coming. His survival wasn't personal grit. It was written into his bones as a group effort. Why would a small band of Neanderthals spend years caring for someone who could no longer hunt or gather? This wasn't a one-time event either. In Vietnam, at a site called Man Bac, archaeologists uncovered the remains of a young man paralyzed from the waist down since adolescence, likely from a condition close to what we'd now call quadriplegia. He couldn't hunt. He couldn't gather. He couldn't even shift his own body weight without help. And yet his bones show he survived roughly a decade after the paralysis began. Bioarchaeologist Lorna Tilley studied this exact case, and from it built a framework now used by researchers worldwide called the bioarchaeology of care. The logic is simple. If a skeleton shows someone survived an illness or injury that should have killed them fast, that survival itself is evidence. Evidence that other people stepped in, fed them, cleaned them, carried them, sometimes literally, through the worst of it. So if you got sick 10,000 years ago, your first dose of medicine probably wasn't a plant or a potion. It was attention. It was someone deciding you were worth keeping alive. But attention alone doesn't kill bacteria. So what else did ancient humans actually do when the fever set in? This is where it gets specific. At El Sidrón Cave in Spain, researchers examined something that sounds almost too mundane to matter: dental calculus. That's just hardened plaque, the same stuff a dentist scrapes off your teeth today. Except this plaque was over 50,000 years old, and trapped inside it were microscopic fragments of food. And something else entirely. Archaeologist Karen Hardy led the analysis, and found traces of chamomile and yarrow inside the calculus of a Neanderthal who had clearly been suffering from a painful dental abscess. Neither plant tastes good. Neither one offers much nutrition. But both have real medicinal properties. Yarrow acts as a natural anti-inflammatory. Chamomile is still used today to calm digestive pain and reduce swelling. Was this random foraging, or something closer to intentional treatment? The evidence leans heavily toward intentional. Picture the moment. A Neanderthal with a throbbing, infected jaw, deliberately choosing the bitter plant anyway, because somewhere in their understanding of the world, that plant meant relief. The pattern doesn't stop there. Skeletons across the ancient world, from Peru to France, show something even more dramatic: healed trepanations. That's a hole deliberately cut or scraped into the skull, often to relieve pressure, treat seizures, or address severe head trauma. The healed part matters most. Bone doesn't regrow smooth edges around an open wound unless the patient lived for a meaningful stretch of time afterward. People were surviving actual skull surgery, with stone tools, thousands of years before anesthesia existed. The evidence doesn't stop at plants and skull surgery either. High in the Alps, hikers once stumbled across the frozen body of a man who died around 5,300 years ago, now known to researchers as Otzi. Preserved almost perfectly by ice, his gear included a small leather pouch carrying birch polypore, a tough fungus that grows on tree trunks. When scientists examined his remains, they also found he was infected with intestinal whipworm, a parasite that causes painful cramping and diarrhea. Birch polypore has documented antibacterial and anti-parasitic properties, even if Otzi couldn't have explained the chemistry behind it. He just knew, somehow, that it helped. So let's reconstruct what actually happens when someone in an ancient community gets sick. It starts quietly. A cough that lingers a day too long. A wound turning red instead of closing up clean. Someone notices, maybe an elder, the kind of person whose decades of memory hold which plants ease a fever and which ones are useless or even dangerous. The sick person gets moved closer to the fire. Their tasks get redistributed without much complaint, because in a group of 20 or 30 people, everyone's survival is quietly tied together. Someone brings water. Someone else brings a bitter root, chewed or boiled down. There's no guarantee any of this works. But there is, almost always, someone there. Now compare that to total isolation. What happens to the people who get sick with no one nearby to help? In most cases, they don't survive long enough to leave a skeleton behind for us to study at all. The injured and the sick that we actually find in the archaeological record, the ones with long-healed fractures or decades-old disabilities, are the success stories. They're physical proof that somewhere, someone decided care was worth the cost. Here's the part that should surprise you. You'd probably assume that as humans settled down, built villages, and eventually invented real medicine, getting sick became steadily less dangerous over time. In some ways, that's true. But for thousands of years, it actually got worse first. When humans shifted from hunting and gathering to farming, something changed that had nothing to do with medicine and everything to do with proximity. Bioarchaeologists Mark Cohen and George Armalagos compared skeletal remains from before and after the agricultural shift across multiple regions, and the pattern held up again and again. Average height dropped. Teeth showed more enamel defects, a sign of childhood nutritional stress. Bones revealed more infections, not fewer. Why would farming, of all things, make people sicker? The answer comes down to density and animals. Farming meant living closer together, in larger, more permanent settlements. It meant living next to livestock, which meant diseases could jump from animals to humans at a scale that simply didn't exist before. It meant depending on a handful of crops instead of a wide variety of wild foods, so a single bad harvest hit much harder. Bodies weakened by poor nutrition fought off illness less effectively, every single time. The comforting story about settling down solving humanity's problems doesn't hold up under a microscope. In terms of raw physical health, many early farmers were measurably sicker than the hunter-gatherers who came before them. So civilization didn't simply cure ancient sickness. In some ways, it just manufactured new versions of it, at a much larger scale. Which brings this back to you. You still get sick. Maybe not from a parasite hiding in undercooked meat, or an abscessed tooth with nothing but yarrow to ease the pain. But the fever still comes. The body still aches in the exact same way it did 50,000 years ago. And here's the strange part. In some ways, you might be more alone in that moment than your ancestors ever were. Think about the last time you were sick. Were you home alone, scrolling through symptoms on a screen, waiting for a pharmacy to open, with no one in the next room to even notice you'd gone quiet? The medicine has changed almost beyond recognition. Antibiotics, vaccines, surgery that doesn't end in fatal infection 9 times out of 10. All of that exists now, and it has saved more lives than anyone curled up in Shanidar Cave could have ever imagined. But the other piece, the one carved into the bones of a disabled Neanderthal who lived years past when he should have died, that piece is easy to lose without noticing. Not the chemistry, the company. So the next time you're sick, and you reach for a bottle instead of a bitter root, remember what the bones actually prove. It was never just about the medicine. It was about whether someone else decided you were worth showing up for. Your skin is burning. Then it's freezing. But this time, picture someone already moving toward you with water in their hands. Because for 300,000 years, that's the part of getting sick that never really went away.